Do you ever think you're too young or too old to be a contender for the faith? Let's disprove those two myths in today's episode of the Contend Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Contend Podcast. As we said during the intro, we're going to be looking at the idea of being too young or too old to serve the Lord or be a contender for the faith. The character we're going to look at today for the podcast is not quite as well known maybe as Noah or as others as Peter or Paul or any of the apostles, which we're going to get into those I'm sure here in the future. But we're going to look at a character who I've dubbed the boy with the sack lunch. Found in the 6th chapter of John, we find a story of the Lord going about and teaching. And a multitude is gathered, following him, looking, watching for the miracles, seeing what he's going to do, listening to his teachings. And then night is upon them. And the Lord tells Philip to go and buy bread that they may eat so they don't get sent home and end up fainting by the way because of hunger. But we see that Philip, in his doubt, says, even if we were to buy 200 pennyworth of bread, that wouldn't be enough for them to even each have a little bit. But we do find in verse number 8 of John chapter 6, it says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, there is a lad here which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? We see even Andrew doubting just a little bit by that last statement. What are they among so many? Obviously not knowing yet what the Lord is going to do. But we do know the story, how the Lord took and blessed these 5 loaves and these 2 fishes, made them more than anyone would have possibly imagined, more than anyone could have ever eaten. They had 12 baskets left over from this. But there's a couple things I want to point out, and then we'll draw our conclusion, our point, just like we had a main point from Noah last week. We have a main point here that I want us to talk about. First, we see Andrew saying, there's a lad here. What an important point that is for us to be trying to get close to the Lord, wanting to be near him, trying to learn as much as we can, maybe looking for the miracles that we can see in our lives, in other people's lives. And what an important point that is for us to bring, to be close to the Lord. But then also we see he had 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. He was willing to give his lunch to the Lord to be used. And that's something that almost equally as important of trying to be near the Lord is to be willing to give our all to the Lord. Be willing to give everything we have to the Lord and say, hey, I know I can't do everything with this, and I know this might not seem like a lot, but God can do so much with just a little bit from us. But the main point is, as good as those 2 points are, but of being close to the Lord and being willing to give everything to the Lord. The main point that I want to bring out for today's podcast and for this contender through history is that God can use anyone, no matter how old we are. Many times I think young people think, oh, well, when I'm older, then I'll be able to be used of the Lord. And many times, unfortunately, older people say, well, when I was in my prime, I was able to be used by the Lord. But the fact of the matter is, the Lord wants to use kids in school to invite their fellow classmates to school, to church, rather, and he wants to use teenagers to be a leader in the youth group to show what God can do with someone who is a contender for the faith. And then older people, he wants them to stay faithful and finish strong. Many times, just because we retire doesn't mean that we retire from serving the Lord. Doesn't mean that we can retire from being a contender for the faith. So we need to make sure that no matter what, when we're contending for the faith, it can be from as young to as old as we get to live for the Lord. We need to make sure that we are contending for the faith. Today on the Contend Wrap-Up, we're looking at 2 news stories. First, there was a task force formed here in the U.S. to combat and find a cure for coronavirus. At the end of their meeting and discussion, Vice President Mike Pence asked to pray with them. He proceeded to do that and then almost immediately received a ton of criticism and mockery for his faith, as happens quite a bit with him. But he, being a good contender for the faith, stood for what was right and prayed with them. In other news, In England, abortions are up 150% for children with cleft palates and lips, something that is, as we know with modern medicine, is very curable. But we as contenders, we as Christians need to step up on this issue. We need to make the love of God known and seen, because abortion is not a political issue. It's definitely an issue of right and wrong. So we as contenders need to stand up for this issue. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. The Bible passage that we used in the podcast is linked in the description, and in the description you also find a link to check out some Contend merchandise, help support the channel, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications for it, and check out some of our other content. And don't forget, don't be a pretender, be a contender.